There's a common belief that people who file for bankruptcy are opportunists, taking advantage of and abusing the system to avoid their obligations. While there are, of course, a few bad apples out there who try to exploit the system, extensive research on this topic refutes this belief. Most people are not exploiting the system. In fact, the majority of those who do file for bankruptcy wait too long. If you've been struggling financially for more than 2 years, you might be inside what bankruptcy researchers call the financial sweatbox, a period of financial hardship that precedes the decision to file for bankruptcy. In this segment, I'll explain this idea of a financial sweatbox and offer you reasons why you should probably break out of it. My name is Jonathan Arias, and I run the law practice Arias Law. According to a paper titled Life in the Sweatbox by researchers with the Consumer Bankruptcy Project, 2/3 of people who file for bankruptcy report that they seriously struggled with their debts for more than 2 years before bankruptcy, and nearly a third reported struggling seriously for over 5 years. The sweatbox is that awful period when you're deep in financial trouble. You're behind on bills and dodging debt collectors in their calls. You've been sued in court. Your home is about to be foreclosed on. Your car is about to be repossessed. Your wages have been garnished. You've taken on an extra job or more shifts, and you've cut your expenses as low as possible, and probably in a way that's detrimental to your health. For example, by foregoing vital medication or food. You're sweating it out and trying to hold your life together. You're trying to fix your situation on your own, but with each passing month, it doesn't seem to improve. In fact, it gets worse. This is the sweatbox. The consequences of remaining in the sweatbox is that you'll obviously enter into bankruptcy worse off than someone who didn't stay as long. By the time a long struggler enters bankruptcy, they're often in much deeper debt. For example, they owe more than twice the value of their assets. Now, this is illustrated in their median debt to asset ratio, which is the ratio of what you owe versus what you own. As you see here, the median debt to asset ratio of a long struggler is over 40% more than of someone who didn't wait as long. Now, based on this, long strugglers are less likely to own a home when they file than other debtors. 40.8% of long strugglers own a home when they enter bankruptcy, whereas 50% of other debtors enter bankruptcy with a home. Let's look at another comparison. For long strugglers who still own their homes, 2/3 come to bankruptcy with an involuntary lien, such as the tax lien against their homes. In contrast, half of those who don't wait as long arrive with an involuntary lien. The median long strugglers with an involuntary lien owe $4,065 on the lien, while the median amount that the other debtors owe is much lower at $1,400. Let's look at collection actions. Half of long strugglers have been sued for a debt, while only 35% of other debtors were sued. Overall, the researchers propose that these higher levels of debt and lower levels of assets likely indicate that long strugglers are less likely to own because they've lost assets, either voluntarily or sitting in the sweatbox longer than necessary also carries health risk. Long strugglers reported that they lived without health-related necessities like medical attention, dental care, medications, and health insurance more often than other debtors. The study didn't capture data on health outcomes, such as whether people in the sweatbox were more likely to experience higher rates of health conditions. But it's reasonable to believe that long strugglers begin to increase their chances of either getting a health condition or exasperating an existing one if they skip doctor's visits or stop taking vital medication. So if you're in the sweatbox, you might be taking a tremendous health risk. Think about something like prostate cancer, for example. It's a tough condition to deal with, but if you're fortunate enough to catch it early, you can save yourself by getting life-saving surgery or therapy. Imagine not going to the dentist to fix a routine oral problem like a cavity. If you don't fill those cavities, you're setting yourself up for a much more painful and expensive root canal in the future. Long strugglers also reported going without food. Unfortunately, in our society, healthier, less processed foods are more expensive than more processed, less healthier foods. Now, the paper didn't discuss this, but it's clear that if you're on a strict budget, you're likely not getting the nutrition you need. You might be surviving on things like ramen noodles, which over time is detrimental to your health. Waiting too long also creates other non-financial problems. Money problems often escalate to personal issues, with relationship problems being the most common. Money is frequently cited as a reason for why married couples divorce. When you're struggling to make ends meet, you get into more arguments with your partner. That's natural. When you come home drained from working those extra hours, you're more irritable. And after spending the last 3 years working nonstop without taking a vacation or time to rest, you fall into an environment where arguments are more likely to occur. If you have kids, your kids will certainly feel your stress. If you lose your home and are forced to move elsewhere, you may need to withdraw your child from their current school to enroll in another, potentially, I will say absolutely, disrupting their education. Your schedules change, your diets change. Kids experience this just as intensely as parents. If the stress of languishing in the sweatbox is intense, and if sitting there makes no sense, why do people wait? There must be something going on. Although finance and bankruptcy law are technical on their face with rules and procedures, they're closely tied to psychology. Now, the top reason people refuse to leave the sweatbox is shame. In this study, 71% of debtors reported that they felt shame somewhat or a great deal when filing for bankruptcy. We need to unpack this. Some people view bankruptcy as an indication of moral failure. The thinking goes something like this. If someone files for bankruptcy, it's likely because they failed in some way or done something wrong. If you were a responsible person, you wouldn't have problems saving money and paying your bills. So what's wrong with you? And then there's the chatter that rattles through your mind. What will people think of me? What will they say when they see me at the next gathering? How do I explain that I'm broke? And if you went to college, the shame feels more intense. How did I manage to go to college and still fail? These are the many questions that I'm sure are running through your mind. The dictionary defines shame as a painful emotion caused by consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or impropriety. But this definition doesn't explain how or why someone feels guilty. There are things in our lives that we cannot control. Yes, we all make mistakes, and we should absolutely take responsibility for those mistakes. But people lose their jobs for reasons out of their control. Look at the labor market right now as of 2025. And the ensuing loss of income that comes with that job loss starts most financial problems. Think about accidents, on the other hand. People experience freak accidents almost all the time that prevent them from working. And quite often, people end up with astronomical medical costs as a result. High medical expenses are another reason why people struggle financially. My point is that your feeling of shame may be unfounded or at least over-exaggerated, especially if you couldn't control your current situation. And even if you legitimately should feel shame because you did something clearly stupid, you shouldn't chain yourself to this emotion longer than necessary. So, what makes loan strugglers finally escape the sweatbox? Many factors plunge people into a bankruptcy: a massive medical bill, a home foreclosure, or a divorce. But the factor that loan strugglers reported in this report as the one that finally prompted them to make the call is the constant pressure from debt collectors. 77% of all debtors said that they very much agreed and somewhat agreed that pressure from debt collectors led to their filing. If debt collectors have chased you, you know how stressful that is. Your phone is ringing all day. You're not picking up your phone. And because you're not picking up your phone, you're missing important phone calls. You may have even changed your phone number. Overall, you probably won't succumb to the first week of calls, but the barrage of calls over an extended amount of time will eventually wear you down. I must emphasize that bankruptcy may not resolve all your financial issues. Some debts, for example, cannot be canceled or are extremely hard to do so, such as taxes, child support, and alimony. And quite often, some people report not being that much better off after bankruptcy. especially if they've waited too long or are incapable of holding a job with a steady income. But bankruptcy offers a few options to help you manage your finances. Now, just briefly and roughly speaking, a bankruptcy under Chapter 7 generally cancels most of your unsecured debts, like credit cards. And a bankruptcy under Chapter 13 organizes all your debts and puts you on a much simpler payment plan lasting between 3 and 5 years. Most importantly, it allows you to retain certain assets, such as your home or your car. When you start a bankruptcy, collection attempts by your creditors must stop, and lawsuits filed against you are essentially paused, with some exceptions. You get a breather to sort things out and gather yourself. Now, this moment of peace can be extremely helpful. I also want to emphasize that getting out of debt on your own is entirely possible. If you go on YouTube and search debt-free stories, you'll find many. So you shouldn't feel completely hopeless. But if you determine that what it would take for you to get out of debt would be too great, then you may want to consider another option, such as bankruptcy. You need to do whatever is best for you and your family. So I'll wrap up and say that if you've been stuck in the Sweatbox and no longer want to sweat it out, send me an email at jonathan@ariasesq.com. I hope this was helpful.